Hi, my name is Chantal Comeau and I'm an English teacher at École Mathieu-Martin, and today's pedagogical capsule is for setting. You've probably discussed this already in your French class, le temps et le lieu de l'histoire. It's probably very similar to English class, but it's good to review things just to make sure that we're getting everything straight for the right courses and that you're getting your full points. Usually, when we talk about setting, we can talk about this for movies, short stories, books, etc. It has to do with the time and the place in which the story is told. One thing that most people make the mistake is they give a list of all the places that the main character goes, or they give a list of all the time frames, of course, depending on the kind of story that we're dealing with. What we would like for students to do is to englobe all of the information, bubble it all in, and then call it that something. We do not want a list. So once you can visualize like the places on a map, for example, or in a time frame, then you bubble all of that in and you wrap it up and you call it according to that. So now we're going to have a look at some examples to see more what we're talking about here. For example, if the time of the story begins on page 2, 5 years ago, and then the story goes on for several pages, and then when we get to page 5, it says now in 1983, and then all of a sudden you have the shift to the present time, you would calculate 5 years ago to this time here, where the answer would be the story took place when. In general, if you bubble it all in, you would say it's the 1970s and the 1980s. I can prove this is true because on page 5, blank, but usually there are other hints or clues in the story that will give you an idea of when a story takes place. For example, as soon as there's a cell phone in the story, it's 2005 plus, or you could call it modern. If you're asking yourself the question, well, how come the main character just doesn't text the mom to run away from the murderer? Well, that's probably because cell phones were not common, so it's previous to 2005 in that case. So there is information, televisions and cell phones. You can use technology, all sorts of things available to you, whatever you can get your hands on, to help you decide how to bubble this in to get the appropriate answer. This is an example for time. Now if we have an example for place, that's usually the trickier one because main characters in books and stories can travel all over the place. It's unlikely they'll be traveling in time, but I suppose that could be possible. But just to keep things simple for now, let's have a look at place. Let's pretend I'm at École Mathieu-Martin and I get on a horse, and my horse's name is Jack. I get on Jack and I ride him across the road to Tim Hortons. I've decided to give my horse Jack Timbits, strawberry filled. That's his favorite. I get back on my horse and shuffle all the way down to City Hall, to the fountain, and my horse decides to have a drink at the fountain. Then I decide to return back to school, back to Mathieu-Martin. We are not going to list the 3 places. We're going to englobe them. So what is the setting of the story? What is the place? The answer would be Central Dieppe. If I were to get on my horse and go all the way down to the arena, then I would include St. Anselm, and I would maybe even still call it Central Dieppe. But as soon as I make my way out to the airport, let's say, on my horse, which is definitely a longer ways to go, then we would include that, and we would say Dieppe and outskirts of Dieppe. So depending on how big the bubble is, that's where you have to englobe your answer. Another example would be I'm in Moncton. I go to Fredericton, then I go to St. John, and I return to Moncton. So the answer would be, what is the setting of the story? It would be southern New Brunswick, because it's the bottom chunk of this. So if you're a visual spatial person and you like maps and you like geography, this may be easy for you. Depending on the story and the hints that you have, it may or may not be easy or difficult. So this is what we're looking at to bubble it in. If I talk about getting on an airplane and I go to Moncton, Fredericton, St. John, and then I end up in Newfoundland, you would say the Maritime Provinces. If I got on an airplane and I say I go to Moncton, Fredericton, St. John, Newfoundland, and Victoria, BC, then my answer becomes Canada, so on and so forth. You have to bubble all of that in. One last poster to look at. And as a review to close up, setting is not a list. You must bubble or fence in all the places and the time frames referred to in the story when the story takes place. Some people like to look at it like you're going to narrow down your answers, where you start bigger picture. If it doesn't say where anywhere in the story and there's no name of a city or anything mentioned, you can simply say it's most likely or probably North America. And then you give the example that there's a microwave or a dishwasher or a car or that kind of thing. If you can narrow it down and you have a hint in the story, they mention, Washington. Well, then you can narrow it down to the country, the section, north, east, south. keep going until you can't go any further. And if they name the city straight out, well, then you have your answer immediately, which is really nice and easy sometimes. Some stories begin exactly like that. In Moncton, New Brunswick in 2012, I went to St. Mario's or Eastside Mario's for supper. So sometimes it's very clear and to the point. Some stories take place only in one room, so depending on the information that you have. For something like this, a map is very helpful, although it's unlikely you'll have access to a map or Google during a summative evaluation. But if you practice and you've got the proper training and you're given a story that is relatively obvious, then it would be fair to ask this on a summative and you'd have the proof and the details to go with it. If we look at time, we can say the century, so you can give a 100-year bracket. You can give early or late 1900s if you would like, so if someone's on a horse. You can give a bracket of 2 or 3 decades, so you could say the 1960s to the 1980s. This is the most popular answer. This is the safest way to go to bubble it all in like that. Then from there, if you've got a year, or you could simply say modern, if there's a cell phone, you don't have to specify the decade, but you could say 2000 plus. Right down to some stories, go right down to the minute, depending on the story. For this, a timeline helps. So depending on the classroom that you're in some classrooms above the chalkboard or up front, there will be a timeline with events on the timeline that can help you figure that out, which is also very nice. And of course, you have proof and samples from the story to give support to your answer. Yes, so to finish, this is the information that we have for setting. Happy practicing, and hopefully you'll get a few in there before your summative, which is usually the way we have things done. Thank you. To conclude, that is setting, the literary element that we use for movies and stories. Thank you.